The morning I found that bright pink notice taped to my front door, I knew my life in Clearwater Estates, Florida, was about to get complicated. I stood there in my work boots and stained jeans, squinting at the paper in the harsh morning sun. The letterhead read Clearwater Estates Homeowners Association in pompous gold lettering, and the message was clear. I had exactly 48 hours to remove the unsightly cardboard from beneath my 2003 Ford F-150 or face a $500 fine. I crumpled the notice in my fist and looked down my pristine suburban driveway at the offending cardboard. It was just a flattened Amazon box sitting under my truck to catch the slow drip of oil that had been plaguing me for the past month. My name is Xavier Jenkins, and I have been living in this cookie-cutter neighborhood for 3 years. I bought the house after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a clean, organized community would be good for me. The place looked perfect. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, streets that curved in aesthetically pleasing ways. What I did not account for was the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who seemed to have made it her life's mission to make everyone as miserable as she was. I walked back inside and tossed the notice on my kitchen counter. My truck had developed the oil leak about a month ago, right after I had paid off a bunch of medical bills from when I broke my arm last year. The repair shop quoted me $1,500 to fix it properly. The leak was slow, maybe a few drops an hour, nothing catastrophic. I had been planning to save up and get it fixed in another month or two. In the meantime, the cardboard seemed like a practical solution. It caught the oil, I could toss it and replace it every few days, and nobody got hurt. Apparently, Patricia Morrison disagreed. I poured myself coffee and reread the notice. The language was aggressive, threatening. It cited Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently prohibited the storage of refuse, trash, or unsightly materials in view of neighboring properties. I had read those bylaws when I bought the house, but they had been presented as reasonable guidelines about not leaving garbage cans out or parking broken-down cars on the street. Nobody had mentioned that a piece of cardboard under a vehicle would qualify as a violation. My phone rang. It was my buddy Marcus calling from the construction site where we both worked. "Hey man, you running late?" he asked. "Yeah, got held up. I will be there in 20, I said, grabbing my keys. "Everything okay? Just HOA nonsense. I will tell you about it later." I drove to work with the notice burning a hole in my consciousness. The job site was a new commercial development in Tampa, about 40 minutes from my house. I worked as a foreman for a mid-sized construction company, and the pay was decent enough to cover my mortgage and bills with a little left over. Not enough for surprise $1,500 truck repairs, though. Marcus found me during lunch break, sitting in the shade of an unfinished building. "So what is this HOA thing?" he asked, biting into a sandwich. I showed him the notice. He read it and laughed. "Man, they are really giving you grief over cardboard, apparently. $500 fine if I do not remove it. That is insane. Just take it out from under the truck. And let oil drip all over my driveway. Then they will fine me for staining the concrete." Marcus considered this. "You are probably right. These HOA people are crazy. My sister lives in one of those neighborhoods, and they fined her for painting her front door the wrong shade of beige." "What did she do?" "She repainted it." "What else could she do?" I spent the rest of the day thinking about my options. I could remove the cardboard and let the oil drip directly onto the driveway. I could try to fix the truck myself, though I was not much of a mechanic. I could take out a credit card and pay for the repair, going back into debt, or I could find another solution. That evening, I drove to the auto parts store on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. A kid with a nose ring greeted me at the counter. "Help you find something?" he asked. I need something to catch oil drips, like a pan or something. He led me to an aisle full of automotive accessories. There, among the various tools and fluids, I found it, a low-profile oil drip pan. It was made of black plastic, about 3 feet by 2 feet, with raised edges to contain fluid. The price tag said $39.99. "This will work," I said. "Got a leak?" the kid asked. "Yeah, slow one." "You should really get that fixed, man. Oil leaks can cause engine damage." "I know, I am working on it." I bought the drip pan and drove home feeling slightly more in control of the situation. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Patricia Morrison standing in her yard 3 houses down, watching me. She was a woman in her mid-50s with severely blonde hair and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she had never relaxed a day in her life. She wore white capri pants and a pink polo shirt with the Clearwater Estates logo embroidered on the chest. I ignored her and went inside. The next morning, I woke up early and went out to replace the cardboard with the drip pan. I pulled the old cardboard out from under the truck. Sure enough, there was a dark stain of oil in the center where the drips had accumulated. I slid the new drip pan into place. It looked professional, purposeful, not at all like trash or refuse. I was admiring my handiwork when a voice called out from behind me. "Excuse me, Mr. Jenkins." I turned to find Patricia Morrison standing at the edge of my driveway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Morning," I said neutrally. "I see you received the notice about your violation," she said, nodding toward where the cardboard had been. "I did, and I took care of it." She walked closer, her eyes scanning my truck and the new drip pan beneath it. "What is that?" she asked, pointing. "It is a drip pan for catching oil. I can see that, but it is still unsightly." I felt my jaw tighten. "It is not trash. It is an automotive accessory. It is serving a legitimate purpose." The HOA bylaws are very clear about maintaining aesthetic standards in our community, Patricia said, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality, like she had given this speech many times before. "Anything that detracts from the visual harmony of the neighborhood is subject to review." It is a black plastic pan under my truck. You can barely see it. I can see it just fine from here. "Are you planning to fine me for this too?" I asked, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. "That depends on whether you plan to remove it voluntarily." "No, I do not." "The truck has an oil leak. I am catching the oil so it does not stain my driveway. That seems like the responsible thing to do." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I will be bringing this matter before the HOA board at our next meeting. In the meantime, I suggest you reconsider your position." She turned and walked back toward her house, her white tennis shoes squeaking against the pavement. I went to work angry that day. The conversation with Patricia had left me feeling violated, like my own property was not really mine. I knew HOAs had rules, but this seemed excessive. I was not running a junkyard. I was not painting my house neon colors or parking a boat in my front yard. I was using a simple automotive tool to prevent damage to my property. "You look pissed," Marcus said when he saw me. I told him about the morning's encounter. "She is threatening to fine you for a drip pan." "That is legal." "I guess so. According to her, anything they deem unsightly can be a violation." "Man, I am glad I rent. This HOA stuff sounds like a nightmare." A week passed. The drip pan worked perfectly. It caught the oil drips, and every few days I would wipe it out with some paper towels. The leak was not getting worse, and I had started putting away money each paycheck toward the repair. At this rate, I would be able to afford it in about 6 weeks. Then the second notice arrived. This one was even more official looking, printed on heavy card stock with multiple citations from the bylaws. The HOA board had met, and unanimously decided that my drip pan constituted a violation of Section 12.4 and Section 8.2, which apparently dealt with automotive equipment and accessories visible from the street. I was being fined $250 for the first offense, with escalating fines of $100 per week if I did not remove the offending item. I called the number listed on the notice. A woman answered on the third ring. Clearwater Estates, HOA. This is Deborah. Hi, this is Xavier Jenkins at 2847 Palmetto Drive. I just received a notice about a fine for having a drip pan under my vehicle. Yes, Mr. Jenkins. Your case was discussed at the board meeting last Tuesday. I do not understand how a drip pan can be a violation. It is an automotive accessory. People have car covers, tire shine, all sorts of things. The board determined that the drip pan is unsightly and detracts from neighborhood aesthetics. But it is barely visible. You have to walk right up to my driveway to even see it. The determination has been made, Mr. Jenkins. You can appeal the decision by submitting a written request to the board, but in the meantime, the fine stands. And if I do not pay it, then additional fines will accrue, and eventually a lien can be placed on your property. I felt my blood pressure rising. A lien over a drip pan. Those are the HOA bylaws that you agreed to when you purchased your home. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up without answering. That evening, I did something I had been avoiding since the divorce. I called my ex-wife's brother, Danny, who was a lawyer. We had gotten along well during the marriage, and he had told me to call if I ever needed legal advice. I had been too proud to take him up on it until now. Xavier, hey man, long time, Danny said when he answered. Yeah, sorry. I should have called sooner. How are you? Good, good. Family's good. What is going on? I explained the situation with the HOA, the cardboard, the drip pan, the fines. Danny listened quietly, then said, Okay, so first thing, do not pay that fine, not yet. Send them a letter stating that you are appealing the decision and requesting a hearing before the board. That will buy you some time. Will that actually help? Maybe. It depends on how reasonable these people are, but HOAs have a lot of power, Xavier. They can make your life very difficult if they want to. They already are, I know. But here is the thing. They also have to follow their own rules. If their bylaws do not specifically prohibit drip pans, then they might be overreaching. Do you have a copy of the bylaws? Yeah, they gave me one when I bought the house. Read through it carefully. Look for any language that might support your case, and document everything. Take photos, save all the notices, keep records of every interaction. You think this is going to get that serious with HOAs? You never know. Better to be prepared. I thanked Danny and hung up, feeling simultaneously better and worse. Better because I had a plan, worse because I was starting to realize this might be a long battle. I spent that night reading through the HOA bylaws. They were 73 pages of dense legal language, covering everything from lawn maintenance schedules to approved house paint colors. Section 12.4, the one they kept citing, was frustratingly vague. It prohibited refuse, trash, and unsightly materials, but provided no clear definition of what constituted unsightly. Section 8.2 was similarly ambiguous, stating that automotive equipment and accessories should be stored out of sight when not in use. Was a drip pan in use if it was constantly catching drips? I thought so, but I had a feeling Patricia Morrison would disagree. I drafted an appeal letter that night, carefully citing the relevant sections and arguing that a functional automotive accessory, properly used for its intended purpose, could not reasonably be classified as trash or refuse. I printed it out, signed it, and put it in an envelope addressed to the HOA board. The next morning, I drove to Patricia Morrison's house and dropped the letter in her mailbox. According to the bylaws, she was required to distribute all official correspondence to the board members within 48 hours. 2 weeks went by with no response. The drip pan continued to do its job. My truck continued to leak slowly but steadily. I continued to save money for the repair. Everything was in a holding pattern. Then Patricia showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. I was eating breakfast when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing there with a man I did not recognize. He was tall, probably in his 60s, wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt similar to Patricia's. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Robert Chen, our HOA vice president," Patricia said without preamble. "Nice to meet you," I said cautiously. "Mr. Jenkins, we received your appeal letter," Robert said. His voice was calmer than Patricia's, more measured. "The board has reviewed your arguments and we have decided to uphold the original decision. The drip pan needs to be removed. Can I ask why? I still do not understand what makes it a violation." "It is visible from the street," Patricia interjected. "It creates a cluttered appearance. You can barely see it, and it is serving a functional purpose." Robert held up a hand. "Mr. Jenkins, I understand your frustration, but the board has to maintain certain standards. We have had complaints from neighbors." "What neighbors? Who is complaining about a drip pan under my truck?" Patricia and Robert exchanged a glance. "That information is confidential," Patricia said. "Of course it is," I muttered. Robert continued, "We are willing to offer you a compromise. If you can install some kind of screening or barrier that blocks the drip pan from view, we will waive the fine." I considered this. "What kind of screening? Decorative lattice, perhaps? Or you could park further back in your garage." "My garage is full of tools and equipment for work. I do not have room to park inside." "Then lattice would work. It is inexpensive and easy to install." I wanted to argue more, to point out how ridiculous this entire situation was, but I was tired, and Robert seemed more reasonable than Patricia, like maybe there was room for negotiation. "Fine. I will put up some lattice, but I am not paying the fine." Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but Robert cut her off. "If you install appropriate screening within 2 weeks, we will consider the matter resolved and void the fine. Does that work for you?" "Yeah, that works." They left, and I closed the door feeling like I had just been backed into a corner. I was compromising on my own property, spending money to hide something that should not need to be hidden, all to appease people who had nothing better to do than harass their neighbors. I called Marcus. "I need help building a lattice screen thing," I said. "A what?" I explained the situation. "Man, just let me come over and fix your truck. I am pretty good with engines." "You are?" "Yeah, my dad owned an auto shop. I grew up working on cars. I bet I can fix that leak for way cheaper than a shop would charge." "Seriously?" "Yeah, bring your truck over tomorrow. We will take a look." The next day was Sunday. I drove to Marcus's apartment complex in St. Petersburg. He lived in a ground floor unit with a parking lot that was always half empty. When I arrived, he was already waiting with a toolbox and a jack. "Let us see what we are working with," he said, sliding under the truck. I stood there feeling useless while Marcus poked around beneath my vehicle. After about 10 minutes, he slid back out. "Okay, so it is your oil pan gasket. Pretty common problem on these older Fords. The gasket gets brittle and starts seeping. How much to fix it?" "The gasket itself is like $20. If you do not mind helping me out, we can knock this out in a few hours." "Are you serious? The shop wanted $1,500. "Yeah, because they are replacing the whole pan and probably trying to upsell you on a bunch of other stuff. But if the pan itself is not damaged, we just need to replace the gasket." We drove to the auto parts store together. Marcus picked out the gasket and some sealant. Total cost, $26.43. Back at his apartment, we spent the afternoon working on my truck. Marcus did most of the technical work while I handed him tools and learned more about engine repair than I ever thought I would. The process involved draining the oil, removing about a dozen bolts, carefully scraping off the old gasket material, applying the new gasket with sealant, and then putting everything back together. By 5 in the evening, we were done. Marcus refilled the oil and started the engine. "Let it run for a few minutes, then we will check for leaks," he said. We sat on the curb drinking beer while the truck idled. After 15 minutes, Marcus slid underneath with a flashlight. "Looks good. No drips." "You are a lifesaver, man. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Just buy me lunch sometime." "Marcus, you just saved me $1,500. I am buying you way more than lunch." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The truck was fixed. I would not need the drip pan anymore. The whole stupid conflict with the HOA would just fade away. Except that is not what happened. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, there was another notice on my door. This one informed me that I had failed to install the required screening within the agreed-upon time frame and was now being fined an additional $100. Furthermore, the drip pan was still in violation, bringing the total fine to $350. I stood there staring at the paper in disbelief. The agreed-upon time frame had been 2 weeks. It had only been 2 days. I immediately called Robert Chen. His number was listed on the notice. "Hello," he answered. "Mr. Chen, this is Xavier Jenkins. I just got another fine notice, but you said I had 2 weeks to install screening." "Ah, yes. I am sorry about that, Mr. Jenkins. Patricia insisted on sending that notice. She does not believe you intend to comply. But we had an agreement. I know. I will talk to her. In the meantime, please do install the screening as soon as possible. Actually, I fixed my truck. The leak is repaired. I do not need the drip pan anymore." "Oh, well, that is good news. Then there should not be any problem." I went outside and removed the drip pan from under my truck. I carried it into my garage and hung it on the wall with my other tools. Problem solved, I thought. The next morning, Monday, I went to work. When I came home that evening, Patricia Morrison was waiting in my driveway. "Mr. Jenkins, I need to speak with you about your truck." "What about it?" "I fixed the leak. The drip pan is gone." "Yes, but there is still an oil stain on your driveway." I looked down. She was right. Where the drip pan had been sitting, there was a faint dark mark on the concrete. It was small, maybe 6 inches across and barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. "That is from before I fixed the leak. I will clean it. It needs to be removed immediately. It is unsightly and violates Section 10.7 regarding driveway maintenance." "I just told you I will clean it. When I get a chance. Tomorrow, probably." "The fine schedule begins at 48 hours after notice. You have been notified." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I went inside and immediately started researching driveway cleaning. According to the internet, oil stains could be removed with a combination of degreaser and pressure washing. I did not own a pressure washer, but my neighbor 2 doors down did. His name was Tom, and we had chatted a few times over the years. I walked over and knocked on his door. Tom answered, holding a beer. "Hey, Xavier, what is up?" "Hey, Tom, I have kind of a weird request. Can I borrow your pressure washer? I need to clean an oil stain off my driveway." "Sure, no problem. Let me grab it." He disappeared into his garage and returned with a gas-powered pressure washer. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked, more or less. "It is pretty straightforward. Just do not point it at anything you do not want destroyed. These things are powerful." I thanked him and carried the pressure washer back to my house. I stopped at the hardware store on my way to work the next morning and bought some industrial degreaser. That evening, I spent an hour cleaning the oil stain. The pressure washer worked amazingly well. Within minutes, the stain was completely gone, the concrete looking fresh and clean. I returned the pressure washer to Tom and went inside feeling accomplished. The truck was fixed. The drip pan was gone. The stain was removed. There was nothing left for Patricia Morrison to complain about. Wednesday afternoon, I came home to find a new notice. This one cited me for unauthorized use of power equipment in violation of Section 15.3, which regulated noise levels in the neighborhood. Apparently, I was not allowed to use gas-powered tools after 6 in the evening. I had used the pressure washer at 7. The fine was $100. I called Danny again. "They are fining me for using a pressure washer at 7 at night," I said without preamble. "What?" I explained everything that had happened since we last spoke. The drip pan, the screening, fixing the truck, the oil stain, the pressure washer. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Xavier, this is harassment. Tell me about it." "No, I mean legally. This is a pattern of targeted harassment. She is looking for reasons to fine you." "So what can I do?" "You need to document everything. Every notice, every conversation, every fine. And you need to start attending the HOA board meetings. Make your presence known. Show them you are not going to be pushed around." "When is the next meeting?" "It should be posted in the community newsletter or on their website." I checked the Clearwater Estates HOA website that evening. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. I marked it on my calendar. The weekend passed without incident. I paid careful attention to every possible HOA violation. I mowed my lawn. I trimmed my hedges. I made sure my garbage cans were put away before the designated time. I was not giving Patricia Morrison any ammunition. Tuesday evening, I drove to the community clubhouse. It was a single-story building near the neighborhood entrance, used for HOA meetings and occasional community events. I had never been inside before. The parking lot was mostly empty. I walked in to find a conference room set up with a long table at the front and several rows of folding chairs facing it. Patricia Morrison sat at the center of the table, flanked by Robert Chen and 3 other people I did not recognize. There were maybe 8 residents scattered among the folding chairs. Patricia looked up when I entered, her expression souring slightly. "Mr. Jenkins, how nice of you to join us," she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but nice. I took a seat in the back row without responding. The meeting began with standard business. They discussed landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, and upcoming community events. It was all very boring and procedural. Then they got to violations and fines. Patricia pulled out a folder. "We have several outstanding violations to discuss. First, we have Mr. Jenkins at 2847 Palmetto Drive with multiple infractions including unsightly automotive accessories, improper use of power equipment, and failure to comply with directives." "I would like to address that," I said, standing up. Patricia looked annoyed. "There will be time for resident comments at the end of the meeting. With respect, you are talking about me right now. I think I should be allowed to respond." Robert leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She nodded reluctantly. "Very well, you may speak." I walked to the front of the room. I bought a drip pan to catch oil from my truck while I saved up to get it repaired. That is not trash or refuse. That is a legitimate automotive tool. I was then told to screen it from view or remove it. Before I could do either, I fixed my truck. The leak is repaired. I removed the drip pan. I cleaned the oil stain from my driveway. I have done everything asked of me, and I am still being fined. At this point, it feels less like enforcement of community standards and more like targeted harassment. Several of the residents in the folding chairs murmured agreement. Patricia's face hardened. "Mr. Jenkins, the fines are not harassment. They are consequences for violating the bylaws that you agreed to follow. If you had simply removed the cardboard when initially asked, none of this would have happened. The cardboard was temporary. I was being responsible by catching the oil instead of letting it stain my driveway. There are proper ways to handle automotive issues. You could have parked on the street. You could have used your garage. You chose to create an eyesore instead. An eyesore that required walking up to my driveway to even see. Mr. Jenkins, this is not a debate." An older man in the front row raised his hand. "Actually, I would like to hear more about this. I was not aware we could not use drip pans. I have one under my lawn mower in my garage. Is that a violation too?" Patricia glared at him. "That is different. Your garage is not visible from the street. But neither is a drip pan under a truck unless you are specifically looking for it," another woman said. The meeting was getting away from Patricia. I could see her struggling to maintain control. Robert stepped in. "I think what Patricia is trying to say is that we need to maintain certain aesthetic standards. The board has to make judgment calls about what is and is not appropriate." "Then maybe the board's judgment is flawed," I said, "because from where I am standing, this seems like a massive overreach." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This discussion is over. The fines stand. If you wish to appeal further, you can hire a lawyer and take it up with the HOA legal counsel. Moving on to the next item." I sat back down, my heart pounding. The rest of the meeting was a blur. When it finally ended, several residents approached me. "That was ridiculous," the older man said. "I am Carl, by the way. I live over on Magnolia. Xavier. Listen, Patricia has been getting more and more aggressive with these fines. You are not the only one she has targeted. My wife got fined $200 for planting the wrong kind of flowers in our front yard." The woman who had spoken up earlier joined us. "I am Linda. She fined me for having a wreath on my door that was not on the approved decorations list." I did not even know there was an approved decorations list. "This is insane," I said. "It is," Carl agreed. "But she is the HOA president and most of the board backs her up. Robert sometimes pushes back, but not enough to make a real difference. What can we do about it?" "Well, HOA presidents are elected. There is an election every 2 years. The next one is in about 8 months. Someone should run against her," Linda said, looking at me meaningfully. "Oh no, I am not a politician. I just want to be left alone." "That is exactly why you should run," Carl said. "You are not doing this for power. You are doing it because what is happening is wrong." I thanked them for their support and left, my mind racing. Running for HOA president was not something I had ever considered. I had a full-time job, a life. I did not want to spend my evenings in board meetings arguing about mailbox colors, but as I drove home, I could not stop thinking about it. Patricia Morrison was making people miserable. She was using her position to bully residents over trivial matters. Someone needed to stand up to her. The next day at work, I talked it over with Marcus. "Dude, you should totally do it," he said. "HOA president, you would be great at it." I do not know anything about running an HOA. Neither does she, apparently. She just knows how to be a tyrant. It is 8 months away. A lot can happen between now and then. So start building support now. Talk to your neighbors. Show them you are serious about making changes. I spent the next few weeks doing exactly that. I started taking walks around the neighborhood in the evenings, introducing myself to people I had only waved at before. I learned that Patricia's aggressive enforcement was widely disliked. Many residents had stories similar to mine. Petty fines, arbitrary rules, a general sense that the HOA had become more about control than community. I also started reading up on HOA law in Florida. It turned out that HOAs were governed by state statutes that limited their power in certain ways. Fines had to be reasonable and properly noticed. Residents had appeal rights. Boards had to follow their own bylaws consistently. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to formally dispute all the fines I had received. I drafted a detailed letter citing the relevant Florida statutes and HOA bylaws, arguing that the fines were excessive, improperly noticed, and not consistently applied. I sent copies to Patricia, the board, and the HOA management company that handled administrative tasks. 2 weeks later, I received a response from the management company. They had reviewed my dispute and determined that 2 of the fines were invalid due to improper notice. Those were being voided. The remaining fines, totaling $250, were upheld. It was not a total victory, but it was something. I had successfully challenged the HOA and won at least partial relief. Patricia was not happy. I started noticing her driving by my house more frequently, slowing down to look for violations. It would have been creepy if it was not so pathetic. Then something unexpected happened. I came home one evening to find a letter in my mailbox from a law firm in Clearwater. The letter informed me that I was being sued by the Clearwater Estates HOA for continued violations of community standards and failure to pay assessed fines. I called Danny immediately. "They are suing me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "For what? Unpaid fines and violations. But I disputed those fines. The management company voided 2 of them." "Okay, do not panic. This is probably a scare tactic. Send me everything. All the notices, all the correspondence, everything. I will take a look." I spent that evening gathering every piece of paper related to the HOA dispute. Notices, letters, emails, photos of the drip pan and the oil stain. I scanned everything and emailed it to Danny. He called me back the next day. "Okay, so here is what I am seeing. The HOA is within their rights to pursue unpaid fines through legal action. However, they have to prove that the fines were valid and properly assessed. Based on what you have sent me, I think we can argue that they were not. So what do I do?" "First, we file a response to the lawsuit. Then we prepare for a hearing. This is going to take some time and probably some money. I can represent you, but I will have to charge you my standard rate. I am sorry, I wish I could do it for free, but my firm has policies." "How much are we talking?" "Probably a few $1,000s, depending on how long this drags out." I felt sick. I was being sued over a drip pan. This was going to cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees, all because I tried to catch oil drips while saving up for a repair. "Do it," I said. "I am not backing down." Over the next few months, the lawsuit consumed my life. Danny filed a response arguing that the HOA had violated Florida statutes and their own bylaws in assessing the fines. The HOA's lawyers responded with their own arguments. There were motions and counter-motions, discovery requests, depositions. I had to take time off work to sit for my deposition. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy named Richard something, asked me hundreds of questions about the drip pan, the cardboard, my truck, my conversations with Patricia. It was exhausting and humiliating, but something good came out of it. As word spread through the neighborhood that I was fighting back against the HOA, more and more residents reached out to me. They shared their own stories of unfair fines and arbitrary enforcement. Several of them offered to testify on my behalf. Carl, the older man I had met at the board meeting, organized a neighborhood petition calling for reforms to the HOA's enforcement procedures. Over 60 residents signed it. The hearing was scheduled for early November, about 6 months after the initial cardboard notice. Danny and I arrived at the Pinellas County Courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning. The HOA was represented by Richard and Patricia Morrison herself. The hearing was in front of a magistrate, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who seemed like she had heard 1,000 of these disputes before. Both sides presented their arguments. Richard argued that I had repeatedly violated clear HOA rules and refused to pay legitimate fines. Danny argued that the rules were vague, inconsistently applied, and that the fines were excessive and punitive. Then Danny called his witnesses. Carl testified about his own experiences with unreasonable fines. Linda talked about the approved decorations list that no one knew existed. A man named George described being fined for parking his work van on the street overnight, even though nothing in the bylaws prohibited commercial vehicles. By the end of the testimony, a picture had emerged. Patricia Morrison was not just enforcing rules. She was using her position to control and punish residents based on her personal preferences. The magistrate listened to everything, asked a few clarifying questions, and then said she would issue a written decision within 30 days. Those were the longest 30 days of my life. I tried to focus on work, on normal life, but the lawsuit hung over everything. I had already paid Danny $3,000 in legal fees, money I could not really afford. Finally, in early December, the decision arrived. Danny called me as soon as he received it. "We won," he said. "We did." The magistrate ruled that the HOA failed to prove the fines were properly assessed according to their own bylaws and Florida statute. She is ordering them to void all the fines and pay your legal fees. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. They have to pay my legal fees. Yes. It is not common, but the magistrate found their enforcement actions were arbitrary and harassing. That opened the door for a fee award. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. So it is over. The lawsuit is over. But Xavier, I would suggest you still run for HOA president. Because this is going to happen to someone else if Patricia stays in power. He was right. I had won my battle, but the war was still ongoing. As long as Patricia Morrison was in charge, residents would continue to be harassed and fined over trivial matters. That evening, I started drafting a letter to the neighborhood announcing my candidacy for HOA president. I outlined my platform: reasonable enforcement of rules, transparent decision-making, treating residents with respect, and reforming the fine structure to ensure it was fair and consistent. I printed copies and spent the next weekend walking door to door, introducing myself and handing out my letter. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were tired of Patricia's iron fist approach. They wanted change. The election was scheduled for March. I had 3 months to campaign. Patricia did not take my candidacy well. She started showing up at every HOA meeting, using her position to paint me as a troublemaker who did not respect community standards. She sent out newsletters warning residents that my radical platform would lead to chaos and declining property values. But the more she attacked me, the more support I gained. People saw through her tactics. They recognized that she was scared of losing power. I attended every board meeting, always professional, always prepared. I built relationships with residents, listened to their concerns, promised to be a different kind of leader. Carl and Linda became my informal campaign managers. We organized a meet and greet at the community clubhouse where I could talk to residents about my vision for the HOA. Over 50 people showed up, more than had attended any HOA event in years. The night before the election, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The cardboard under my truck, the drip pan, the lawsuit. All of it because Patricia Morrison could not tolerate a piece of automotive equipment she deemed unsightly. But it had also led to something positive. It had forced me to engage with my community, to stand up for what was right, to fight against petty tyranny. The election was held in the community clubhouse on a Saturday in mid-March. Every homeowner was allowed one vote. Voting happened between 9 in the morning and 5 in the evening, with results announced at 6. I showed up at 5:30. The room was packed with residents. Patricia stood near the front, her arms crossed, her face a mask of confidence, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Robert Chen stood at the podium. He had been designated the neutral vote counter since he was not running for any position. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We had exceptional turnout this year. 317 votes cast out of 412 eligible households. That is a record for our community." He opened the envelope containing the results. For the position of HOA president, the votes are as follows. Patricia Morrison, 139 votes. Xavier Jenkins, 178 votes. The room erupted in applause. I stood there in shock for a moment before it sank in. I had won. I was the new HOA president. People crowded around me, shaking my hand, congratulating me. Linda was crying. Carl was grinning from ear to ear. I looked over at Patricia. She was staring at me with an expression of pure fury. Then she turned and walked out of the clubhouse without a word. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I had to learn how to actually run an HOA, which was more complicated than I had anticipated. There were budgets to manage, contracts to review, meetings to run. Robert Chen, who had been vice president, agreed to stay on and help me transition into the role. He turned out to be a decent guy who had just been overshadowed by Patricia's aggressive personality. One of my first actions as president was to reform the fine structure. I worked with the board to establish clear guidelines about what constituted a violation, how much notice residents would receive, and what the appeals process would be. We also reduced the fine amounts for minor violations and established a warning system for first-time offenses. The changes were popular with residents. People started taking more pride in the neighborhood because they felt respected rather than policed. I also made it a point to be accessible. I gave out my phone number and email, encouraged residents to contact me with concerns. The HOA became less of an adversary and more of what it was supposed to be, an organization that supported the community. Patricia Morrison moved out of Clearwater Estates about 6 months after the election. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had bought a condo in Clearwater Beach, where there was no HOA and she could not bother anyone. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be with the added responsibility of running an HOA. My truck continued to run smoothly, no more oil leaks. The drip pan remained in my garage, a reminder of how a simple problem had spiraled into something much larger. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after the election, I was mowing my lawn when a car pulled up in front of my house. A young couple got out, looking at the houses in the neighborhood with the excitement of first-time home buyers. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Do you live here?" "I do," I said, walking over. "We are thinking about buying in this neighborhood. What is it like living here?" "It is good. Quiet, friendly, nice community." "What about the HOA? We have heard horror stories about HOAs." I smiled. "The HOA is fine. We try to be reasonable and work with residents rather than against them." "That is good to hear. The last neighborhood we looked at had all these crazy rules." "We have rules too," I said, "but they are enforced fairly, and if you ever have an issue you can talk to the board. We are here to help." They thanked me and continued their tour of the neighborhood. As I watched them go, I thought about how far things had come. A year ago, I would not have been able to say any of that with a straight face. Patricia Morrison had turned the HOA into something people feared rather than valued, but things were different now. The community was healthier, happier. Residents actually attended board meetings because they wanted to, not because they were being fined. We had organized social events, a neighborhood watch program, even a community garden. It had all started with a piece of cardboard and a drip pan. Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes. I finished mowing my lawn and went inside, satisfied with how everything had turned out. The lawsuit was long over, the legal fees paid by the HOA as ordered by the magistrate. My truck ran perfectly. My neighbors were friendly. And I had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself, even over something as simple as a drip pan, was worth the fight. That evening, I got a text from Marcus inviting me to a barbecue at his place. I grabbed a 6-pack of beer and drove over, grateful for friends who supported me through the chaos. "So how is life as HOA president?" Marcus asked as we stood around his grill. "Busy, but good. I think we are making real progress. You ever regret getting into all that drama?" I thought about it. The stress, the lawsuit, the election, all of it could have been avoided if I had just removed the cardboard that first day. But then Patricia would still be in charge, still making people miserable. "No," I said. "I do not regret it. That is good, man. You did something important. You stood up to a bully." We ate burgers and drank beer and talked about normal things like sports and work and plans for the summer. It felt good to just be a regular person again, not someone constantly fighting against an unjust system. As I drove home that night, I passed the entrance to Clearwater Estates with its decorative sign and manicured landscaping. It looked the same as it always had, but something fundamental had changed. The community was no longer governed by fear and petty rules. It was a place where people actually wanted to live, and all because I refused to accept an unfair fine for using a drip pan. The following Tuesday, I presided over my regular board meeting. We discussed routine matters, landscaping bids, pool chemical costs, plans for repainting the clubhouse. Robert Chen brought up a concern from a resident about a neighbor's barking dog. "How do you want to handle it?" he asked me. The old Patricia Morrison approach would have been immediate fines and threats. But I had learned there was a better way. "Let me talk to both residents," I said. "See if we can work something out before making it official." The board agreed. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me for how things were being run. An older woman named Margaret told me it was the first time in 10 years she had felt comfortable attending a board meeting. "Patricia made everything so adversarial," she said. "You make it feel like we are all on the same team." "That is the goal," I said. Driving home that night, I reflected on everything I had learned. Being an HOA president was not about wielding power or enforcing arbitrary rules. It was about serving your community, finding reasonable solutions to problems, and treating people with respect. It seemed like such a simple concept, but Patricia Morrison had never grasped it. She had seen the position as a way to control others, to impose her will on the neighborhood. That approach had made everyone miserable, including probably herself. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house I had bought 3 years ago after my divorce. Back then, I had just wanted a fresh start in a nice, quiet neighborhood. I had not anticipated getting dragged into HOA drama, filing lawsuits, running for office. But life had a way of surprising you. The next morning, I was drinking coffee on my front porch when Carl walked over from his house down the street. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what is up?" "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you have done with the HOA. My wife and I were seriously considering moving because of Patricia, but now we are happy to stay." I am glad to hear it. That is exactly why I ran. You ever think about running for city council or something? You are good at this, I laughed. No thanks. One elected position is enough for me. Carl smiled and headed back to his house. I finished my coffee and got ready for work, feeling content with the way my life had turned out. The months continued to pass peacefully. The HOA ran smoothly under my leadership. Fines were rare and only issued for serious violations after warnings and attempts at resolution. Residents paid their dues on time because they felt the money was being used wisely. We upgraded the playground, resurfaced the tennis courts, and hired a better pool maintenance company. Property values in Clearwater Estates actually increased, contrary to Patricia Morrison's predictions that my radical reforms would destroy the neighborhood. Turned out people wanted to live in a community where they were treated like adults rather than children who needed constant supervision. One afternoon in late summer, about 16 months after the original cardboard incident, I was working in my garage when a process server showed up at my door. "Xavier Jenkins," he asked. "That is me." He handed me an envelope. "You have been served." My heart sank. Was the HOA being sued? Had I screwed something up as president? I opened the envelope and read the papers inside. Then I started laughing. It was not a lawsuit against me or the HOA. It was a lawsuit against Patricia Morrison. Apparently, after she had moved to her condo in Clearwater Beach, she had continued her pattern of aggressive behavior. She had been serving on the condo board and had filed numerous complaints against her neighbors for trivial violations. One of those neighbors, a retired attorney, had finally had enough and was suing her for harassment, and I was being called as a witness. I called Danny. "You are not going to believe this." After I explained the situation, he said, "So Patricia is being sued for the same behavior she showed in your neighborhood." "Exactly, and they want me to testify about my experiences with her." "Will you do it?" "Absolutely. Someone needs to hold her accountable." The deposition was scheduled for September. I showed up at a law office in downtown Clearwater and told my story under oath. The retired attorney's lawyer asked me detailed questions about Patricia's behavior as HOA president, the lawsuit she had filed against me, the pattern of unreasonable fines and enforcement. Patricia was there, sitting across the conference table from me, looking older and more bitter than I remembered. She would not make eye contact with me the entire time. After the deposition, the retired attorney's lawyer thanked me for my time. "Your testimony is very helpful," he said. "It establishes a pattern of behavior. Glad I could help. I hope he wins." I never found out the outcome of that lawsuit. But a few months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Patricia had sold her condo and moved to North Carolina. Apparently, she had finally worn out her welcome in Florida. Life in Clearwater Estates continued peacefully. I served out my 2-year term as HOA president and then ran for re-election unopposed. Residents were happy with how things were going and saw no reason for change. My truck continued to run well, though it was getting old. I started saving up for a new one, but there was no rush. The gasket repair Marcus had done held strong, no more leaks. Sometimes, when I was working in my garage and saw the drip pan hanging on the wall, I would think about that morning I found the first pink notice on my door. How angry and frustrated I had been. How unfair the whole situation had seemed. But that unfairness had led me to stand up, to fight back, to ultimately make positive changes for an entire community. Sometimes, the most trivial conflicts reveal deeper problems that need to be addressed. 2 years into my presidency, on a warm spring evening, the HOA held a community barbecue at the clubhouse. Over 100 residents attended, including families with children, retirees, young couples. Everyone was laughing, eating, enjoying the Florida sunshine. Robert Chen found me by the grill. "You did good, Xavier. This is what an HOA should be." "We did good," I corrected. "It is a team effort." "Sure, but it started with you. If you had just rolled over and paid those fines, none of this would have happened." He was right. My refusal to accept unfair treatment had been the catalyst for everything that followed. As the evening wound down and residents started heading home, I stood in the parking lot looking at the community I had helped transform. The houses looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. People were not afraid of the HOA anymore. They saw it as a resource, not an adversary. A young family walked past me, the parents holding hands while their kids ran ahead. "Great party," the father said to me. "Thanks for coming. You know, we almost did not buy here because of all the HOA horror stories we had heard. But our realtor told us things had changed. Best decision we ever made." That comment made everything worthwhile. All the stress, the lawsuit, the campaign, the work of running the HOA. It had all been worth it to create a community where people felt welcome and respected. I drove home that evening feeling genuinely proud of what had been accomplished. Not just by me, but by all the residents who had supported reform, who had stood up against unfair treatment, who had voted for change. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Beer tomorrow." "Sounds good," I replied. Life was good. Simple, normal, peaceful. Exactly what I had wanted when I moved to Clearwater Estates 4 years ago. It had taken a circuitous route to get here, through conflict and legal battles and political campaigns. But we had arrived at a good place. The next morning, I was backing out of my driveway when I noticed a new family moving into Patricia Morrison's old house. A moving truck was parked in front, and a couple in their 30s was directing movers carrying furniture inside. I parked my truck and walked over. "Hi, I am Xavier. Welcome to the neighborhood." The man smiled and shook my hand. "Thanks, I am Brian. This is my wife, Jennifer. If you need anything or have questions about the HOA, let me know. I am the president." Jennifer's face showed momentary concern. "Oh, is the HOA strict here? We have heard stories." "It used to be," I said honestly. "But we have reformed things. As long as you keep your property reasonably maintained and do not do anything crazy, you will be fine. And if there are ever any issues, just talk to us. We are here to help, not to hassle people." They both looked relieved. "That is great to hear. Our last neighborhood had an HOA that was constantly sending violation notices." "Yeah, I know how that is. It will not be like that here." I helped them carry a few boxes inside, chatting about the neighborhood and the community. They seemed like good people, the kind of residents who would contribute positively to Clearwater Estates. As I drove to work, I thought about how different that conversation would have been 4 years ago under Patricia's regime. She would have been over there with a clipboard, looking for violations, establishing her authority. Instead, I had welcomed them and offered help. That was the kind of community I wanted to live in, and now it was the kind of community we had. The years continued to pass. I served as HOA president for 6 years total, before finally deciding not to run for re-election. It was time for new leadership, fresh ideas. A woman named Sarah Valdez, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood, ran on a platform of continuing the reforms I had started while adding new initiatives like community gardens and energy-efficient lighting. She won easily. I attended her first board meeting as president, sitting in the audience as a regular resident for the first time in years. It felt strange but also liberating. I had done my part. Now it was someone else's turn. After the meeting, Sarah approached me. "Thank you for everything you did. You set a really high standard." Just treat people with respect and use common sense. That is all it takes. I will do my best." Life returned to the simple existence I had always wanted. Work, home, friends, occasional HOA meetings as a concerned resident but not as a leader. My truck finally gave out after 18 years, and I bought a used Honda that was more reliable and did not leak oil. Sometimes, I would see the old drip pan in my garage and remember everything it had started. The absurdity of being fined for catching oil drips, the escalation into a lawsuit, the decision to run for office, the years of service to my community. It had been quite a journey, all because of a piece of cardboard and a tyrannical HOA president who could not let people live their lives in peace. 10 years after the original incident, I was sitting on my porch on a Saturday morning when Carl walked over. He was older now, moving a bit slower but still sharp. "Remember when this place was a nightmare?" he asked, sitting in the chair next to me. "I do. Hard to believe it has been 10 years. You changed a lot of lives, Xavier, including mine. We all did it together. Maybe, but you were the one who stood up first. That took courage. I did not feel particularly courageous. I had just been a guy with a leaky truck who refused to accept an unfair fine. But I suppose that was how most changes started, with ordinary people refusing to accept unreasonable treatment. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood go about its Saturday routine. Kids riding bikes, people mowing lawns. A sense of peace and normalcy that had been absent all those years ago under Patricia Morrison's reign. "Whatever happened to Patricia?" Carl asked. "I heard she moved to North Carolina. Beyond that, I do not know. Good riddance." Yeah, life in Clearwater Estates continued peacefully. The HOA functioned well under Sarah's leadership, and the leaders who came after her. The reforms I had implemented became the standard way of doing things, so normalized that new residents did not realize there had ever been a different, harsher approach. My story became something of a neighborhood legend, told to new residents as an example of why the HOA was so reasonable. People would say, "Back when Xavier was president, he reformed everything after this crazy situation with a drip pan." The details would get fuzzy, embellished, turned into myth. But the core truth remained. One person standing up to unfair treatment had changed an entire community for the better. I eventually retired from construction work at 65 and spent my days doing the things I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I took up woodworking, built furniture in my garage. I volunteered at a local community center teaching basic home repair skills to people who could not afford contractors. I traveled a bit, visiting national parks and historic sites around the country. But I always came back to Clearwater Estates, to the house I had bought after my divorce, to the community that had become my home in ways I never expected. The drip pan remained in my garage, a reminder that the smallest conflicts can sometimes lead to the most meaningful changes. It was never about the drip pan itself. It was about standing up for what was right, refusing to be bullied, believing that ordinary people could make a difference, and we had made a difference. Clearwater Estates was a better place because people had chosen to fight against unfair treatment rather than simply accepting it. That legacy continued long after I stopped being HOA president, passed down through the community like a shared value. On my 70th birthday, the HOA threw a surprise party for me at the clubhouse. Residents from across the neighborhood attended, including people who had moved in long after my presidency ended. They gave speeches about how the community culture I had helped create made Clearwater Estates special. Sarah Valdez, long since retired from being president herself, stood up and said, "Xavier showed us that an HOA does not have to be adversarial. It can be supportive, reasonable, focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. That lesson has guided every president who came after him. I felt genuinely moved by the recognition, not because I wanted praise, but because it meant the changes had lasted. The community had not reverted to the old ways after I left leadership. The culture shift had been permanent. As the party wound down and people headed home, I stood in the parking lot one more time, looking at the community I had called home for over 20 years. It looked different now, updated and modernized in various ways, but the essence was the same. A place where people treated each other with respect, where rules were reasonable and fairly enforced, where an HOA was a resource rather than a tyrant. All because I had refused to accept a fine for using cardboard under my car to catch oil leaks, and then bought a drip pan instead. It was a small act of defiance that had spiraled into something much larger. A reminder that you never knew which battles would define your life, which small stands would lead to meaningful change. You just had to be willing to fight for what was right, even when it seemed easier to give in. I drove home that evening feeling grateful for the journey, absurd as it had been. The cardboard, the drip pan, the lawsuit, the election, the years of service, all of it had mattered. All of it had made a difference, and in the end, that was all anyone could ask for.